Keanu Reeves, the man who'd conquered Hollywood with a quiet intensity and a heart of gold, was about to stumble into the most outrageous, jaw-dropping showdown of his life. An event so wild, so utterly unhinged, it would leave the world buzzing in disbelief. Picture this. A sleepy Saturday morning in March 2025, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans, and Keanu, unassuming as ever, stepping into a place he thought was his sanctuary. What happened next? Something so amazing, so hilariously chaotic, it could only be described as the greatest coffee shop scandal ever witnessed. A barista, an absolute firecracker of a woman, would lose her mind in a way no one saw coming, and Keanu, oh Keanu, would flip the script in the most controversial, mind-blowing way imaginable. Buckle up, because this tale starts with a single spilled latte and ends with an empire trembling. The day began like any other for Keanu Reeves, a man whose life had been a whirlwind of fame, fortune, and quiet generosity. He'd spent the morning dodging paparazzi, weaving through the bustling streets of Los Angeles in his unassuming black jacket and worn-out boots, craving nothing more than a moment of peace. His destination? A quaint, tucked-away coffee shop called Brew Haven, a place he'd secretly poured his heart and soul into. No one knew it was his. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. Not the customers sipping their overpriced cappuccinos, not the hipsters snapping photos of the rustic decor, and certainly not the staff, including one fiery barista named Mara. She was a whirlwind of energy, tattooed arms, a sharp tongue, and a reputation for not taking nonsense from anyone. Keanu liked that about her, from afar at least. He'd watched her work during his low-key visits, appreciating her no-filter attitude. But today, Mara was about to cross a line she didn't even know existed. Keanu slipped through the door, the bell above jingling softly, barely audible over the hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. The shop was alive, tables crowded with regulars, the air buzzing with the clatter of cups and the murmur of voices. He pulled his cap lower, a habit born from years of dodging attention, and shuffled toward the counter. Mara was there, her dark hair tied back in a messy bun, her hands moving with the precision of a seasoned pro as she steamed milk and barked orders at her coworker, a lanky kid named Jasper who seemed perpetually terrified of her. Keanu watched, amused as she juggled 3 orders at once, her focus unbreakable, until it was. He stepped up to the counter, ready to order his usual, a black coffee, no fuss, no fanfare. Mara didn't even glance at him at first, her eyes locked on the espresso machine as she muttered something under her breath about weekend rushes. Keanu cleared his throat, offering a quiet, "Hey, could I get?" But before he could finish, Mara's hand slipped. A latte she'd been pouring for another customer tipped over, splashing frothy milk across the counter and splattering onto Keanu's jacket. The shop fell silent for a split second, all eyes turning toward the scene unfolding at the counter. Keanu froze, blinking down at the mess, then up at Mara, who was already glaring at him like he'd personally insulted her entire existence. The air crackled with tension as Mara's temper ignited. She slammed the empty cup down, her voice cutting through the quiet like a whip. Keanu, still calm, raised his hands in a peacemaking gesture, but it was too late. Mara was a volcano and she was erupting. She didn't recognize him, not with the cap pulled low and the chaos of the moment clouding her vision. To her, he was just some clumsy customer who'd ruined her rhythm. Her words came fast and furious, a torrent of frustration spilling out as she berated him for standing too close, for not watching where he was going, for existing in her space at the wrong damn time. The other customers shifted uncomfortably, some pulling out their phones to capture the meltdown, others whispering to each other as the scene escalated. Keanu stood there, absorbing it all, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. Mara's rant grew louder, more unhinged, her arms flailing as she pointed at the mess, at him, at the world itself. Jasper, the poor coworker, shrank back, clutching a rag like it was a lifeline, too scared to intervene. The shop was a pressure cooker now, the energy shifting from awkward to electric as Mara's fury reached its peak. She leaned across the counter, her face inches from Keanu's, her voice dripping with venom as she demanded he leave and never come back. The crowd held its breath, waiting for his response, expecting him to slink away in embarrassment. But Keanu didn't move. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached up, slowly pulled off his cap and locked eyes with her. Mara's tirade faltered mid-sentence, her words catching in her throat as recognition hit her like a freight train. The shop went dead silent, the only sound the faint drip of coffee from the overturned cup. Keanu's face, those familiar, soulful eyes, that unmistakable jawline, was unmistakable now, and Mara's fury evaporated into a stunned, gaping stare. The customers gasped, phones still recording as the reality sank in. This wasn't just some random guy. This was Keanu Reeves. And he wasn't leaving. He leaned in closer, his voice low and steady, and dropped a bombshell that turned the entire scene upside down. "You're yelling at the guy who owns this place." The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal, as Mara's world tilted. The crowd erupted into murmurs, a chaotic mix of shock and disbelief rippling through the shop. Keanu straightened up, his gaze never leaving hers, and in that moment everything changed. Mara's bravado crumbled, her hands trembling as she processed what he just said. Jasper dropped the rag, his mouth open, staring at Keanu like he'd just seen a ghost. The customers were buzzing now, some laughing, some whispering, all of them hooked on the drama unfolding before them. Keanu didn't say another word, not yet. He simply stood there, letting the revelation sink in, letting the chaos build. This wasn't just a coffee shop spat anymore. This was something bigger, something wilder, and it was only the beginning. Mara stumbled back a step, her mind racing to catch up with the impossible truth. She just unleashed the rant of a lifetime on Keanu Reeves, Keanu freaking Reeves, and he wasn't just a celebrity. He was her boss, the guy who signed her paychecks, the hidden mastermind behind Brew Haven. Her face flushed red, then pale, then red again, a kaleidoscope of emotions flashing across it as she tried to process the wreckage of her outburst. Keanu, meanwhile, remained calm, almost eerily so, his presence commanding the room without effort. He didn't need to shout or throw his weight around. He never did. But the weight of his words had shifted everything, and now the shop was a live wire, crackling with anticipation. The story could have ended there, a viral moment, a funny anecdote for the internet to chew on. But Keanu wasn't done, not by a long shot. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, and said something else, something quieter, something the customers straining to hear couldn't quite catch. Mara's eyes widened, her breath hitching, and whatever he'd said sent a shiver through her. The crowd leaned in, desperate for more, but Keanu turned away, grabbing a towel from the counter and wiping the milk off his jacket like it was nothing. He tossed it back down, nodded at Jasper, who was still frozen in shock, and started walking toward the back of the shop, toward the employees' only door. Mara watched him go, her hands clenched into fists, her chest heaving as she wrestled with what to do next. The customers were filming everything now, the room a sea of raised phones and whispered speculation. Keanu disappeared behind the door, leaving the shop in a state of suspended chaos, and Mara stood there, caught between humiliation and defiance. She just lost it on Keanu Reeves, and he'd turned the tables in a way she never saw coming. But something told her, and everyone watching, that this wasn't the end. This was just the spark. The real fire was yet to come, and Keanu Reeves was about to light it in a way that would shake Brew Haven to its core. The door to the employees-only section of Brew Haven clicked shut behind Keanu Reeves, sealing him off from the chaos he'd left simmering in the coffee shop's main room. The air back here was different, cooler, quieter, laced with the faint hum of a refrigerator and the distant clatter of dishes from the prep area. But the calm was deceptive. A thin veneer stretched over a brewing storm that was about to break wide open. Keanu moved with purpose, his boots echoing softly against the tiled floor as he navigated the narrow hallway lined with shelves of coffee beans and stacks of to-go cups. He wasn't running from the scene he'd just ignited. No, Keanu didn't run. He was heading deeper into the heart of his empire, a place no one in the front of the shop even suspected he controlled, and he was about to pull a lever that would send shockwaves through every corner of Brew Haven. Out in the main room, Mara stood rooted to the spot, her fists still clenched, her breath coming in shallow bursts as the weight of Keanu's revelation crushed her bravado into dust. The customers were a buzzing hive now, their phones still raised, capturing every flicker of emotion on her face, confusion, anger, disbelief swirling together in a messy dance. Jasper hovered nearby, his lanky frame hunched as he clutched the counter for support, his wide eyes darting between Mara and the door Keanu had disappeared through. The air crackled with a strange energy, a mix of awe and anticipation, as if everyone knew they were witnessing the opening act of something explosive. Mara's mind raced, replaying Keanu's words, "You're yelling at the guy who owns this place," and the quieter, cryptic follow-up she hadn't fully processed yet. What had he meant? What was he planning? She didn't know, but the pit in her stomach told her she just stepped into a game she wasn't prepared to play. Back in the hallway, Keanu reached a small, unmarked door tucked behind a stack of crates, a door so unassuming most employees probably didn't even notice it. He pulled a key from his pocket, a simple brass thing that looked like it belonged to an old house, not a modern coffee shop, and slid it into the lock. The mechanism clicked with a satisfying thud, and the door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into shadows. Keanu didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind him, and the faint glow of a single bulb overhead cast long, jagged shadows across his face as he descended. This wasn't just a backroom office. This was his sanctum, a hidden nerve center beneath Brew Haven where he'd built something bigger than anyone suspected, a secret that tied the coffee shop to a web of influence stretching far beyond its rustic walls. The basement room was small but meticulously organized. A desk sat against one wall, cluttered with papers, a laptop, and a stack of leather-bound notebooks. A corkboard loomed above it, pinned with maps, receipts, and grainy photos of faces Mara and Jasper would never recognize. Keanu dropped into the chair, his movements fluid despite the tension coiling in his shoulders, and flipped open the laptop. The screen flared to life, revealing a dashboard of security feeds, every angle of Brew Haven captured in real time. The counter where Mara still stood, frozen, the customers whispering and filming, Jasper nervously wiping down a perfectly clean spot on the counter. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he watched, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He wasn't just the owner in name. He was the architect of something massive, and Mara's outburst had just lit a match under it all. Out in the shop, the chaos was starting to shift. Mara snapped out of her daze, her jaw tightening as defiance clawed its way back to the surface. She wasn't about to let this, whatever this was, break her. She grabbed a rag and started wiping down the counter with furious swipes, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the phone still pointed her way. The customers were relentless, their voices rising as they debated what had just happened. Was Keanu really the owner? Why hadn't anyone known? What was he doing back there? Theories flew, some wild, some eerily close to the truth, but Mara didn't care. She was angry now, angrier than she'd been when the latte spilled. She'd been humiliated, blindsided, and she wasn't about to let Keanu Reeves, famous or not, walk away without an explanation. Jasper, meanwhile, was crumbling under the pressure. His hands shook as he tried to take an order from a customer who was more interested in grilling him about Keanu than buying coffee. The kid's voice cracked as he stammered out half answers, his eyes darting toward the back door like he expected Keanu to burst through at any second. The shop was a pressure cooker, the tension building with every passing minute, and Mara could feel it pressing against her chest. She slammed the rag down, her patience snapping, and stormed toward the employee's only door. She didn't care if Keanu was her boss. She didn't care if he was a Hollywood legend. She was going to find him, and she was going to demand answers, even if it meant barging into whatever he was hiding back there. Downstairs, Keanu leaned back in his chair, the faint hum of the laptop filling the silence as he watched Mara's determined march on the security feed. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, not because he underestimated her, but because he admired her fire. She was a force, chaotic and unapologetic, and he'd known that when he hired her through a series of proxies and fake names. But this was uncharted territory. He tapped a few keys, pulling up a file labeled Brew Haven Operations, and scrolled through a list of encrypted documents. This wasn't just a coffee shop. It was a front, a carefully crafted hub for something bigger, something controversial, something that could shake the city if it ever came to light. And Mara, with her reckless fury, had just stumbled into the middle of it. Mara reached the door, her hand slamming against it as she shoved it open with more force than necessary. The hallway stretched out before her, dim and cluttered, and she hesitated for a split second, her breath catching as the reality of what she was doing sank in. She was chasing down Keanu Reeves, her boss, apparently, in a place she barely knew, driven by a mix of rage and curiosity she couldn't tamp down. She moved forward, her steps quick and purposeful, her eyes scanning the shelves, the corners, the shadows. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she'd know it when she found it. The air felt heavier the deeper she went, like the shop itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next explosion. Back in the basement, Keanu's fingers paused over the keyboard. He'd seen Mara enter the hallway on the feed, her silhouette sharp against the grainy footage. He could have locked her out, could have kept her at bay with a flick of a switch, but he didn't. He let her come. Maybe it was curiosity, his own this time, or maybe it was something else, something he couldn't name yet. He stood, closing the laptop with a soft click, and moved toward a small safe tucked beneath the desk. He spun the dial, the faint clicks echoing in the quiet, and pulled out a single item, a worn journal, its pages yellowed and edges frayed. He flipped it open, revealing handwritten notes, dates, names, evidence of the empire he'd built beneath Brew Haven's surface. This was his insurance, his leverage, and now, with Mara closing in, it was about to become his weapon. Mara reached the unmarked door at the end of the hallway, her hand hovering over the handle. She didn't know what was behind it, didn't know why her gut was screaming at her to turn back, but she'd never been one to listen to caution. She twisted the knob, expecting resistance, but it gave way easily, swinging open to reveal the staircase descending into darkness. Her heart pounded, a mix of adrenaline and defiance pushing her forward as she took the first step down. The air grew colder, the faint glow of the bulb casting eerie shadows across the walls, and she knew she was walking into something she couldn't unsee. Keanu heard her footsteps, soft but unmistakable, echoing down the stairs. He slipped the journal into his jacket, his movements calm and deliberate, and turned toward the entrance just as Mara's shadow appeared at the bottom of the steps. Their eyes met across the dim room, hers blazing with fire, his steady and unreadable, and in that moment the storm broke. Mara didn't hesitate. She stormed forward, her voice silent but her presence screaming with intent, and Keanu raised a hand, not to stop her but to signal something else, something bigger. He stepped aside, revealing the corkboard behind him, the maps, the photos, the secrets pinned there for her to see. Mara froze, her breath catching as she took it all in, and Keanu watched, waiting for her reaction. The coffee shop above was just the surface. This was the truth. And now Mara was part of it, whether she liked it or not. The basement beneath Brew Haven hummed with a quiet intensity as Mara stood frozen, her eyes locked onto the corkboard that loomed before her like a map to a forbidden world. The dim light flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across the pinned papers, maps marked with red ink, grainy photos of unfamiliar faces, receipts taped in chaotic clusters. It was a collage of secrets, a tapestry of something vast and shadowy, and Mara's mind scrambled to make sense of it. Keanu Reeves stood just a few feet away, his presence steady and unshaken, the worn journal still tucked inside his jacket as he watched her process the enormity of what she'd stumbled into. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken questions, but Keanu didn't rush to explain. He didn't need to. The truth was right there, sprawled across the wall, and Mara was smart enough to piece it together, if she dared. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her chest rising and falling as she stepped closer to the corkboard, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over a photo pinned near the center. It showed a man in a suit, his face half hidden by shadow, standing outside Brew Haven late at night. The timestamp on the corner read 3 weeks ago, long after closing hours. Mara's gaze darted to another photo, this one of a woman slipping an envelope under the counter, her expression tense and guarded. Receipts fluttered beneath her touch, some bearing cryptic codes, others listing payments far too large for coffee sales. Her stomach twisted as the realization hit her like a punch. This wasn't just a coffee shop. It was a front, a hub, a piece of something so much bigger than she'd ever imagined. And Keanu, quiet, unassuming Keanu, was the one pulling the strings. Upstairs, the chaos in Brew Haven was reaching a fever pitch. Jasper had abandoned his post at the counter entirely, retreating to the corner near the espresso machine where he stood clutching a mop, his eyes wide and glassy as the customers grew louder. The crowd had morphed into a restless beast, their phones still recording, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of speculation and excitement. Some were laughing, recounting Mara's meltdown with exaggerated gestures, while others debated Keanu's bombshell. He owns this place. Like for real. The air buzzed with energy, the shop's cozy charm drowned out by the electric hum of a moment gone viral. A few bolder customers edged toward the employees' only door, craning their necks for a glimpse of what lay beyond. But no one dared cross the threshold, not yet. They were too hooked, too desperate to see how this wild tale would unfold. Downstairs, Mara's defiance flared back to life, her shock giving way to a burning need for answers. She turned on Keanu, her posture rigid, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and disbelief. She didn't need to speak. Her presence demanded an explanation, and Keanu knew it. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, and pulled the journal from his jacket, holding it out like an offering. Mara hesitated, her hand hovering before she snatched it from him, her fingers gripping the leather cover as if it might bite. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the cramped handwriting, dates, locations, names she didn't recognize, all tied to Brew Haven. One entry caught her attention. March 10, 2025, drop-off completed. $50 case secured. Next phase begins. Her head snapped up, her gaze locking onto Keanu. And in that moment she understood, this wasn't just a side hustle. This was a machine, and Keanu was its architect. Keanu watched her closely, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, taking in every flicker of emotion on her face. He'd built this operation over years, a quiet empire hidden beneath the surface of a city that adored him but never truly knew him. Brew Haven wasn't just a passion project, it was a conduit, a way to move money, information, and influence without drawing attention. He'd used his fame as a shield, his low-key demeanor as camouflage, and it had worked flawlessly until Mara's outburst cracked the facade. Now, standing in this basement with her, he faced a choice: shut her out or bring her in. He'd seen something in her from the start, a raw, untamed energy he couldn't ignore, and maybe, just maybe, she was the wild card he needed to take this to the next level. Mara's mind raced as she flipped through the journal, her anger warring with a strange, reluctant awe. She'd always prided herself on reading people, on cutting through the bullshit, but Keanu had blindsided her completely. The man she'd pegged as just another celebrity slumming it for a coffee fix was a mastermind, a shadow player in a game she didn't even know existed. She slammed the journal shut, her hands shaking, and thrust it back at him, her chest heaving as she struggled to find her footing. Keanu took it calmly, slipping it back into his jacket, and for a moment they just stood there, the silence between them heavier than the secrets on the wall. Then, without breaking eye contact, Keanu reached for the laptop and tapped a key, bringing the security feed back to life. The screen flared, showing the chaos upstairs in stark clarity. Jasper cowering, the customers growing restless, a few now banging on the employee's only door, their voices muffled but insistent. Mara's breath caught as she watched, the reality of the situation crashing over her like a wave. This wasn't just about her and Keanu anymore. It was spiraling, pulling the whole shop into its orbit. Keanu's fingers moved over the keyboard, pulling up a secondary feed, this one from outside. A black SUV idled across the street, its tinted windows glinting in the morning sun, and Mara's gut twisted as she spotted a figure inside, watching, waiting. Keanu's voice didn't break the silence, but his actions did. He zoomed in, revealing a familiar face from one of the corkboard photos. The man in the suit, the drop-off guy. Mara's pulse quickened, her mind spinning as the pieces clicked into place. Whoever this guy was, he was tied to whatever Keanu was running, and now he was here, right outside, while the shop teetered on the edge of anarchy. She turned to Keanu, her eyes wide, her defiance morphing into something sharper, determination. She wasn't backing down, not now, not when she was this close to understanding the truth. Keanu met her gaze, a faint nod acknowledging her shift, and he moved toward the desk, pulling a small device from a drawer. A burner phone, its screen blank but its purpose clear. He powered it on, the faint beep cutting through the tension, and typed a quick message, his fingers steady despite the storm brewing around them. "You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going." Upstairs, the banging on the door grew louder, the customers' patience snapping as they demanded answers, their phones still rolling, capturing every second of the escalating madness. Jasper was a wreck now, his mop abandoned as he pressed himself against the wall, his face pale and sweaty. The crowd surged forward, a few shoving past the counter, their curiosity outweighing their manners, and the employees' only door rattled under their fists. The shop was a powder keg, and Mara's outburst had lit the fuse. Now it was only a matter of time before it blew. Outside, the SUV's engine rumbled to life, the man in the suit stepping out, his posture calm but his eyes scanning the shop with predatory focus. He knew something was happening. He could feel it. Downstairs, Keanu slipped the burner phone into his pocket, his movements smooth and calculated as he turned back to Mara. She stood there, her fists clenched, her body coiled like a spring, ready to fight or flee, she wasn't sure which. Keanu stepped closer, his presence towering without effort, and pointed to the security feed, to the man in the suit now crossing the street toward Brew Haven. Mara's breath hitched, her mind racing as she realized what was coming. A reckoning, not just for her, but for everything Keanu had built. He didn't flinch, didn't waver, and in that moment Mara saw him for what he truly was. Not just a celebrity, not just an owner, but a man who thrived in the chaos he created. The basement door upstairs burst open, the crowd spilling into the hallway, their voices a roar as they stumbled over each other, phones raised, searching for Keanu, for Mara, for the truth. Footsteps thundered above, shaking the ceiling, and Mara's eyes darted to the stairs, her heart pounding as the world closed in. Keanu didn't move. He stood there, calm as ever, and pulled the journal from his jacket once more, flipping it open to a specific page. He held it out to her, his gaze steady, and Mara took it, her hands trembling as she read the entry, March 15, 2025, contingency activated, trust the fire. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and understood. This was his plan, this was his move, and she was the fire. The basement beneath Brew Haven pulsed with a raw, electric energy as Mara clutched the journal, her eyes locked onto Keanu Reeves' steady gaze. The words "trust the fire" burned into her mind, a cryptic command that felt both like a warning and a call to action. Above them, the ceiling trembled under the weight of pounding footsteps, the crowd's chaotic surge into the employees' only hallway shaking loose dust that drifted down like ash. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and adrenaline, and Mara's pulse hammered in her ears as the reality crashed over her. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was in the eye of the storm, and Keanu, with his unshakable calm, had just handed her the match to set it all ablaze. Keanu moved with the precision of a man who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. He stepped past Mara, his boots silent against the concrete floor, and reached for a small panel hidden behind the corkboard. With a flick of his wrist, he pried it open, revealing a tangle of wires and a single red button, a failsafe, a reset, a piece of the machine he'd built beneath Brew Haven's surface. His fingers hovered over it, not pressing yet, but the intent was clear. Whatever this button did, it was his contingency, his way out, or his way deeper in. Mara watched, her breath catching as she realized the depth of his control. This wasn't improvisation. This was a plan, and she was now a part of it, whether she'd signed up for it or not. Upstairs, the hallway was a madhouse. The crowd had forced their way past the door, a tidal wave of curiosity and entitlement spilling into the narrow space. Phones flashed like strobe lights, capturing the clutter of shelves and the flickering fluorescent bulbs as voices shouted over each other. "Where's Keanu? What's going on? This is insane." Jasper had followed them, dragged along by the momentum, his mop still clutched in his hands like a talisman against the chaos. He stumbled over a crate, his lanky frame crashing into a stack of cups that clattered to the floor, adding to the pandemonium. The crowd pressed forward, their footsteps a thunderous drumbeat, and a few spotted the unmarked door at the end of the hall, the one Mara had passed through minutes ago. They surged toward it, hands banging against the wood, their excitement morphing into a frenzied hunger for answers. Outside, the man in the suit moved with a predator's grace, crossing the street in long, deliberate strides. His black SUV idled behind him, its engine a low growl cutting through the morning air. He adjusted his cufflinks, his face a mask of cold calculation, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of urgency. He'd been watching Brew Haven for weeks, tracking the drops, the payments, the quiet exchanges that kept Keanu's operation humming. But this was different. The shop was unraveling, the carefully woven threads of secrecy snapping one by one, and he knew Keanu was at the center of it. He reached the front door, his hand resting on the handle, and paused, his gaze sweeping the chaos inside. The crowd, the phones, the noise, it was a mess, but it was also an opportunity. He stepped in, blending seamlessly with the throng, his presence unnoticed amidst the uproar. Downstairs, Mara's hands tightened around the journal, her knuckles white as the sound of the crowd grew louder, closer. She could hear them now, their muffled shouts filtering through the ceiling, and her instincts screamed at her to run, to get out before the whole place came crashing down. But Keanu's calm anchored her, his presence a silent command to stand her ground. He turned to her, his eyes sharp and searching, and pointed to the security feed still flickering on the laptop. The screen showed the hallway, the crowd clawing at the unmarked door, and then, outside, the man in the suit stepping into the shop. Mara's stomach dropped, recognition flaring as she matched his face to the photo on the corkboard. Keanu saw it too, his jaw tightening ever so slightly, and in that moment the game shifted. Keanu's hand moved to the red button, his fingers brushing it lightly as he weighed his next move. Mara watched, her breath held, as he pulled the burner phone from his pocket instead, typing another quick message with the same steady precision. The screen lit up with a response almost instantly, a single word, "now," and Keanu's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smirk. He slipped the phone back into his jacket and turned to Mara, his voice silent but his actions speaking volumes. He gestured to the journal in her hands, then to the stairs, and Mara understood. He was giving her a choice. Stay and burn with him, or take the evidence and run. She hesitated, her mind racing, but the fire in her gut roared louder than her fear. She nodded, a sharp, decisive jerk of her head, and Keanu's smirk widened. She was in. The unmarked door upstairs splintered under the crowd's relentless pounding, the wood giving way with a crack that echoed through the basement. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, a chaotic rush of bodies spilling into the narrow space, phones still rolling, voices screaming Keanu's name. Mara spun toward the sound, her heart slamming against her ribs, but Keanu didn't flinch. He stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the stairs, his posture relaxed but his presence a wall of quiet authority. The first wave of customers stumbled into the basement, their eyes wide as they took in the scene. The corkboard, the laptop, the man they'd come to find standing there like a king in his hidden court. Gasps rippled through the group, phones thrusting forward, and the air exploded with shouts and questions. Mara clutched the journal tighter, her body tensing as the crowd surged closer, their excitement a living thing that threatened to swallow them whole. Keanu raised a hand, a simple gesture that somehow silenced the room, the chaos pausing as if he'd flipped a switch. His eyes swept over them, calm and piercing, and for a moment the world held its breath. Then, from the back of the group, the man in the suit pushed forward, his presence cutting through the crowd like a blade. He stopped a few feet from Keanu, his expression unreadable, but the tension between them was a live wire, sparking and deadly. The customers sensed it, their phones shifting to capture the standoff, and Mara's grip on the journal tightened as she realized this was it, the reckoning. Keanu met the man's gaze, his calm unshaken, and reached into his jacket, pulling out the journal once more. He held it up, not opening it, just letting it hang there, a silent challenge. The man's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition passing through them, and Mara's pulse quickened as she saw the shift. He knew what it was. He knew what it meant. The crowd murmured, sensing the stakes but not understanding them, their phones still rolling as the basement became a stage for something far bigger than they could grasp. Keanu stepped closer, closing the distance between him and the man, and the air thickened with anticipation. Mara watched, her breath caught as Keanu's hand moved, not to the journal, but to the panel behind him, his fingers brushing the red button once more. The man in the suit tensed, his hand twitching toward his pocket, but Keanu was faster. He pressed the button, a soft click echoing in the silence, and the basement erupted into chaos. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the room into darkness. A low rumble shook the floor, not an explosion, but something deeper, a system shutting down, a signal sent. The crowd screamed, their phones dropping as panic took hold, and Mara stumbled back, her shoulder hitting the wall as she fought to stay upright. The man in the suit lunged forward, his silhouette a blur in the shadows, but Keanu was already moving, his form disappearing into the dark as the basement became a battleground. Mara's hands scrambled over the journal, her mind racing as she pressed herself against the wall, the crowd's chaos swirling around her. She couldn't see Keanu, couldn't see the man in the suit, but she could feel the shift. The fire was spreading and she was caught in its heart. The rumble grew louder, the air vibrating with the sound of something massive coming undone, and Mara knew whatever Keanu had triggered wasn't just about Brew Haven. It was about everything, the empire, the secrets, the web he'd woven. The lights flickered back on, dim and unsteady, and Mara's eyes darted to the stairs, where Keanu stood, his jacket torn, his gaze locked on her. The man in the suit was gone, vanished in the melee, and the crowd was a tangle of confusion, their phones forgotten on the floor. Keanu stepped toward her, his presence a beacon in the madness, and held out a hand. Mara took it, her fingers trembling but her resolve steel, and together they moved toward the stairs, the journal still clutched against her chest. The fire was lit, the inferno roaring, and there was no turning back now. Brew Haven was burning, not with flames but with truth, and Keanu Reeves was leading her straight into the heart of it. The stairs creaked beneath Keanu Reeves and Mara as they ascended from the basement, the air growing warmer and thicker with every step, saturated with the chaos they'd left behind. Mara's hand gripped Keanu's, her fingers slick with sweat but unyielding, the journal pressed tight against her chest like a shield. The faint flicker of the basement lights faded below, replaced by the dim glow filtering through the shattered remnants of the employee's only door. The crowd's screams and shouts echoed up the stairwell, a cacophony of confusion and fear, but Keanu moved with a purpose that cut through it all, calm, deliberate, a man who'd already seen the endgame and was walking toward it without hesitation. Mara followed, her breath ragged, her mind a storm of questions she couldn't voice, but her resolve hardened with every thud of her boots against the steps. They emerged into the hallway, the narrow space a battlefield of overturned crates and scattered cups, the crowd's earlier surge having left a trail of destruction in its wake. The air buzzed with the faint hum of electricity, the lights flickering overhead as if the shop itself were struggling to hold together. Keanu didn't pause, didn't glance at the wreckage. He led Mara forward, his grip firm, guiding her through the debris toward the main room of Brew Haven. The journal in her hands felt heavier now, its pages a ticking bomb of secrets, and she couldn't shake the image of the man in the suit vanishing into the shadows below. He was out there somewhere, and Mara knew he wasn't done. Not with Keanu, not with her, not with whatever this empire was crumbling into. The main room was a different beast entirely. The crowd had spilled back from the hallway, their phones abandoned or broken on the floor, their faces a mix of panic and awe as they stumbled over each other, trying to make sense of the blackout, the rumble, the sudden plunge into darkness that had shaken the shop. Jasper stood near the counter, his mop long gone, his lanky frame trembling as he stared at the chaos like a deer caught in headlights. The espresso machine hissed behind him, steam curling into the air, a lone survivor of the madness. Customers shouted, some rushing for the door, others lingering, their curiosity outweighing their fear. The front windows rattled as the rumble from below subsided, leaving an eerie stillness that hung like smoke over the room. Keanu released Mara's hand, stepping into the center of the shop, his presence a magnet that drew every eye despite the turmoil. He didn't need to raise his voice or gesture wildly. His calm was enough, a quiet force that silenced the room without effort. Mara stayed close, her body tense, her eyes darting to the front door where the man in the suit had entered minutes ago. He wasn't there now, but the black SUV still idled across the street, its tinted windows a dark omen against the morning light. Keanu followed her gaze, his expression unreadable, and reached into his pocket, pulling out the burner phone once more. His fingers moved over the screen, typing a message with the same steady precision he'd shown downstairs, and Mara's stomach twisted as she wondered who was on the other end, who held the strings he was pulling now. The crowd parted as Keanu moved toward the counter, his torn jacket swaying slightly with each step, a testament to the fight he'd walked away from unscathed. Mara followed, her boots crunching over shards of a broken mug, her mind racing as she tried to piece together what came next. The journal's weight pressed against her ribs, its secrets burning through her. Dates, names, payments, all tied to Brew Haven, all tied to Keanu. She'd seen enough to know this wasn't just about money or power. It was about control, about a network that stretched beyond the shop's walls, and Keanu had been its silent architect. But the blackout, the button, the chaos, it was all unraveling now, and she couldn't tell if he'd planned this collapse or if he was improvising on the edge of disaster. Jasper flinched as Keanu approached, his hands fumbling nervously as if he expected a reprimand, or worse. But Keanu ignored him, reaching beneath the counter and pulling out a small metal box, its surface scratched and dented. He flipped it open, revealing a set of keys and a folded piece of paper, and Mara's breath caught as she recognized the brass key from the basement door among them. Keanu unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning it quickly. A map hand-drawn with Brew Haven marked in the center and lines radiating out to other locations across the city. He folded it again, slipping it into his jacket and grabbed the keys, his movements swift but unhurried. Mara watched, her pulse quickening as he turned to her, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. He didn't need to say it, she knew they were leaving and they were leaving now. The front door burst open before they could move, the bell jangling wildly as a new wave of energy flooded the shop. 3 figures stormed in, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in dark jackets, their faces hard and focused. They weren't customers, weren't paparazzi. They moved with the precision of professionals, their eyes scanning the room until they landed on Keanu. Mara tensed, her hand tightening around the journal, but Keanu didn't flinch. He stepped forward, meeting them halfway, and the crowd shrank back, sensing the shift. The woman in the group, a wiry figure with sharp cheekbones, nodded at Keanu, her expression unreadable, and handed him a small device, a tracker or communicator, its screen glowing faintly. Keanu took it, slipping it into his pocket with the phone, and turned back to Mara, his hand outstretched once more. Mara didn't hesitate this time. She took it, her fingers curling around his, and they moved toward the back of the shop, the 3 newcomers falling into step behind them like a silent guard. The crowd murmured, some reaching for their phones again, but the energy had shifted. Fear was overtaking curiosity now, and the shop felt like a sinking ship, its passengers too stunned to jump. Jasper watched them go, his mouth open, his hands limp at his sides, and Mara caught a glimpse of his wide eyes as they passed. Confusion, betrayal, relief all tangled together. She didn't look back. The journal was her anchor now, and Keanu was her guide, pulling her through the wreckage of Brew Haven toward something unknown. Outside, the air hit them like a slap, cool and sharp against the heat of the shop. The black SUV was still there, its engine rumbling, but Keanu didn't head for it. Instead, he led Mara and the trio down a narrow alley beside the building, his pace quickening as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. The city was waking up to the chaos, the ripple of Keanu's contingency spreading beyond Brew Haven's walls. Mara's boots pounded the pavement, her breath coming in sharp bursts, and she glanced at the three behind them, silent, focused, their presence a shield against whatever was coming. Keanu's hand tightened around hers, a silent reassurance, and they rounded a corner, disappearing into the shadows of the alley as the sirens grew louder. The alley opened into a small lot, a nondescript van waiting with its engine running. Keanu released Mara's hand, moving to the driver's side as the trio split, two climbing into the back, the woman taking the passenger seat. Mara hesitated, her eyes darting to the journal, then to Keanu, who nodded once sharply, urging her in. She slid into the back, the door slamming shut behind her, and the van lurched forward, tires squealing as it peeled out of the lot. The city blurred past the tinted windows, flashing lights, honking horns, the distant roar of a crowd. And Mara's chest heaved as she realized they were running, not just from the shop, but from the ashes of everything Keanu had built. Keanu drove with a focus that bordered on eerie, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as the woman beside him tapped the tracker, its screen pulsing with a moving dot. Mara leaned forward, her breath catching as she saw it, a signal, tracking something or someone, and she knew without asking it was the man in the suit. The journal lay heavy in her lap, its secrets a weight she couldn't shake, and she looked at Keanu, his profile sharp against the dim light filtering through the windshield. He'd burned it all down, Brew Haven, the operation, the control, and now they were on the move, chasing the one piece that had slipped through his grasp. The van sped into the city, the sirens fatting behind them, and Mara knew the fire wasn't out yet. It was just beginning to spread. The van cut through the veins of Lowe's Angels like a shadow, its engine a low growl beneath the hum of the city waking to chaos. Keanu Reeves gripped the wheel, his knuckles white but his face a mask of unshakable calm, guiding them deeper into the urban sprawl as the first hints of dawn bled into the sky. Mara sat in the back, the journal a heavy anchor in her lap, her fingers tracing its worn edges as the weight of the night pressed against her chest. The trio from Brew Haven flanked her, two men silent and stoic in the shadows, the woman up front tracking a pulsing dot on the device in her hand. The air inside the van was thick with tension, a coiled spring ready to snap, and Mara's breath came in shallow bursts as she pieced together the fragments of the empire Keanu had torched, and the man they were now chasing through the ashes. The city blurred past the tinted windows, neon signs flickering out, streetlights dimming as morning crept closer, the distant wail of sirens fading into a memory. Keanu's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching Mara's gaze for a fleeting second, and in that look she saw something raw, determination, yes, but also a flicker of regret, a crack in the armor he'd worn so effortlessly. He'd burned Brew Haven to the ground, triggered the contingency that shattered his hidden network, and now they were running not just from the fallout, but toward the one loose end that could unravel it all. The man in the suit. The tracker's dot pulsed faster now, a heartbeat on the screen, and the woman in the passenger seat leaned forward, her voice silent but her body tense as she pointed to a turn ahead. Keanu took it sharply, the van lurching as it veered into a narrow industrial district, the streets lined with warehouses and rusted chain-link fences. The tracker's signal grew stronger, the dots stabilizing as they closed in, and Mara's stomach twisted with a mix of dread and adrenaline. She didn't know who this man was, not fully, But she'd seen his face on the corkboard, felt his presence in the basement, and now he was the key to whatever Keanu was fighting to protect or destroy. The van slowed, its tires crunching over gravel as they pulled into an abandoned lot, the skeletal remains of a factory looming ahead. The black SUV sat there, its engine off, its doors closed, a silent predator waiting in the dark. Keanu killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening as the van settled into stillness. He turned to the woman who nodded once sharply, and the trio moved as one door sliding open, boots hitting the ground, their forms disappearing into the shadows of the lot with a precision that spoke of training Mara couldn't fathom. Keanu stepped out, his torn jacket swaying in the cool morning breeze, and held the door for Mara, his hand outstretched once more. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the journal, then to the SUV, but the fire in her gut roared louder than her fear. She took his hand, stepping onto the gravel, and together they moved toward the vehicle, the crunch of their footsteps the only sound in the eerie quiet. The SUV's driver's side door creaked open as they approached, and the man in the suit emerged, his posture calm but his eyes sharp, glinting with a cold fury that sent a shiver down Mara's spine. He adjusted his cufflinks, a deliberate move that belied the tension in his frame, and stepped forward, stopping a few feet from Keanu. The air between them crackled, a storm of unspoken history and betrayal, and Mara clutched the journal tighter, her body coiled as she braced for whatever came next. The man's gaze flicked to her, then back to Keanu, and a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, a predator sizing up prey, or perhaps a rival who'd underestimated his opponent. Keanu didn't flinch. He reached into his jacket, pulling out the journal, and held it up, its worn cover catching the faint light of dawn. The man's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing as recognition flashed across his face, and Mara's pulse quickened as she realized the power it held, evidence leverage, the heart of Keanu's empire laid bare. Keanu stepped closer, closing the distance, and the man tensed, his hand twitching toward his pocket, but Keanu was faster. He tossed the journal to the ground between them, a deliberate act that landed like a thunderclap, and the man froze, his gaze locked on the book as if it might explode. The trio emerged from the shadows then, surrounding the SUV in a silent, deadly arc, two men flanking the rear, the woman cutting off any retreat. The man in the suit didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them, but his jaw tightened, a muscle ticking as he realized the trap had closed. Keanu stepped back, his hands loose at his sides, and Mara watched, her breath held, as the standoff stretched into eternity. The city hummed in the distance, oblivious to the war playing out in this forgotten lot, and the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the gravel. The man lunged for the journal, a desperate move born of instinct, but Keanu anticipated it. In one fluid motion, he kicked it away, the book skidding across the ground as the woman darted forward, her hand clamping onto the man's arm with a grip like steel. He twisted, fighting back with a ferocity that spoke of training, but the trio was relentless, two men closing in, pinning him as he thrashed, his suit tearing at the seams. Mara stumbled back, her heart pounding, and Keanu moved to her side, his presence a steady anchor as the struggle unfolded. The man's shouts cut through the dawn, raw and furious, but they faded as the trio subdued him, dragging him toward the van with a precision that left no room for escape. Keanu knelt, picking up the journal from the gravel, and turned to Mara, his eyes searching hers. She nodded, a silent understanding passing between them, and he slipped the book back into his jacket, its secret safe for now. The trio loaded the man into the van, his wrists bound, his face a mask of defeat, and the woman climbed in after him, her tracker discarded on the ground. Keanu led Mara back to the driver's side, his hand brushing hers as they moved, and they slid into the van without a word, the doors slamming shut with a finality that echoed across the lot. The engine roared to life and they pulled away, leaving the SUV behind, a relic of a battle won, but a war far from over. The city swallowed them as they drove, its streets waking to the news of Brew Haven's collapse, Viral videos, wild rumors, a coffee shop turned into a legend overnight. Mara leaned back, her body trembling with exhaustion, the journal's weight gone but its imprint lingering in her mind. Keanu drove in silence, his focus unwavering, but his hand rested briefly on hers, a gesture of trust, of partnership forged in the fire. The trio in the back watched the man in the suit, his head bowed, his fight drained, and Mara knew this wasn't the end. Not for him, not for Keanu, not for her. The empire had burned, but its embers still glowed, and she was part of it now, bound to Keanu in a way she couldn't unmake. The van slipped into a quiet street, pulling into a garage tucked behind a nondescript building. Keanu killed the engine, the silence settling over them like ash, and turned to Mara, his eyes soft but resolute. He didn't need to say it, she knew they won this round, but the game was bigger, the stakes higher, and the man in the suit was just one piece. The trio exited, dragging their prisoner with them, and Keanu stepped out, holding the door for Mara once more. She followed, her boots steady on the concrete, and together they walked into the building, the journal safe in his jacket, the city buzzing with the story of a barista, a coffee shop, and a man who'd turned the world upside down. Brew Haven was gone, its secrets scattered to the wind, but Keanu Reeves remained quiet, unyielding, a shadow moving through the ashes. Mara stood beside him, her fire tempered but unbroken, and as the garage door closed behind them, the final ember flickered out. The story would live on, a legend whispered in coffee shops and alleyways, but for now they vanished into the dawn, leaving the chaos behind and taking the truth with them. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, that way you'll never miss our newest uploads.